Hey everybody, Ben here. Before we dive into today's episode, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce you to Dagish Academy's phosphine certification program. Our video-based interactive program is one of the most comprehensive courses available on the topic of phosphine fumigations, and we cover everything you need to know from initial inspections and bidding all the way to the aeration and deactivation process at the end. And you'll also learn all about pest identification, calculating dosages, sealing the structure, and so much more. So if you're interested in learning more about this course, please reach out to us at training@dagishamerica.com. And hey, if you mention the podcast in your email, you'll receive a coupon code for 25% off the purchase price. Yeah, I said that right, 25% off the purchase price. So we look forward to hearing from you, and happy training. Now, on to the podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to Dagish America Presents. I'm Ben Harrell, host of the podcast, and as always, I am so happy to have the opportunity to talk to you about the industry that I work in. Last episode, we talked about the importance of ultra-low volume fogging applications. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to that episode yet, I highly suggest you do. There is a ton of very valuable information there. In today's episode, we'll be discussing a very important and sometimes overlooked aspect of pest control, sanitation. And to help us today, we've invited Eric Myers, Global IPM Manager for ADM, to join us. So please help me welcome Eric to the podcast. Eric, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing all right, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. I'm really excited to talk to you today. You know, so far, all the guests that we've had have been kind of just, they've worked directly in the pest control or the fumigation industry. And I know you also have a history and you came from the pest control industry, but you actually moved into a position with an organization where you're kind of fumigation and pest control adjacent. So you have an experience level that I think our listeners will be very, very interested in hearing, because you had a foot in our world and still kind of do, but you also have a foot in the manufacturing and the processing world as well. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your insight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So just to start off with, I always ask every guest to do this at the beginning of the podcast episode, just to kind of let the listeners know a little bit about you. So I just wanted to ask if you could just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your history in the industry.
Yeah. So depending on how far back you want me to go, but it's been an interesting career path. And, I actually went to culinary school. So I have a culinary degree.
Oh, wow.
And I like to, I guess, put that out there when I do some trainings internally and all that. It's just, when you think about the pest control industry, it goes right to that entomology, the board certified entomologist, et cetera. But there's some of us, we look at that industry as an entry level industry. And so I know there's others like James Miller with Trace is same thing. We had backgrounds prior to pest control, happened to get into pest control, and then, kind of our careers bloom. So it's an interesting background. And I have a culinary degree, was living in Colorado, needed some part-time work to struggling 20-year-old or something like that. And IFC was out there, needed some part-time help. And so that was kind of my introduction into the pest control industry. When I moved back to Pennsylvania, I got a call one day that said, "Hey, we're hiring full-time in the Harrisburg area. Like you to go down and interview for that." So went down, interviewed for that, and boom, that started my pest control career. I was offered a guaranteed salary. And again, hourly wages in the culinary side of things versus a guaranteed salary. It's like, okay, let's see where this goes.
Yeah.
So, but when I look at where I've gotten to now that, I've made that transition to a food company, ADM. I started out in the milling division, and now I'm in a global role for the company, focused specifically on, the IPM side of things, working with our plants on building plans, improvement opportunities, and working with our pest providers on the same thing, kind of developing those plans and coming up with solutions for the numerous pests that we encounter. But back to that starting, in the Harrisburg area, if I didn't start in that territory, I'm pretty comfortable saying I wouldn't be where I'm at today. That's kind of where my education came to be in the pest control world. That territory was such a well balanced between fumigation work, fogging work, service work, just kind of, and then the flour mills and the bakeries, and it just the complementary, well-rounded approach that territory had from all things pest control is really what kind of gave me my education in, kind of helped me, follow that career path and see that transition then to a food company like ADM.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you mentioned that because, there's a lot of people in our industry that, if you would have asked me, say 25 years ago, if I would be where I'm at now, I would have said absolutely not. I was a factory worker when I, right out of school. So, I thought maybe I was going to stay in that industry. I live in the Midwest in a blue collar town. And so it's kind of what everybody did. But, I dipped the toe into the pest control world. And much like you, I ended up working for an organization where I got an opportunity to do a lot of different things, not just pest control, not just rodent control, but fumigation and fogging and all kinds of different things. And all of that, the thing I liked the most was the fumigation. And so I just really kind of pinpointed myself down that avenue. But wow, I'm so glad I got the opportunity to work in all of those other facets of pest control because it's really helped me out a lot along the way.
Yeah. And kind of continuing with that, right? The interesting part for me. So and it was really when I met my wife that we relocated to Kansas, and that was kind of that opportune or that ideal or that separation point that just made sense at that point from the pest control industry. And I had all this knowledge, and I'm like, well, hey, it would be really interesting to see if I can take what I know and kind of the approaches I have and the problem solving. And hey, what if I put all this energy into one company versus the various and the many customers that we had? And so I kind of wrote a job description or proposal and kind of pitched that through ADM, and, kind of the rest has become history. But even with that transition, that in itself, like it really changed my perspective on pest control. And not from, I did a lot of that work already. The fumigation, the fogging, the spot treatments, all that stuff, like I had all that. But when you think about the pest control industry and the food sector itself or industrial, whatever you want to call that, you're servicing that account a couple hours a week, each week. And then maybe you get a little bit more when you're down for a weekend and you're doing some of those large space treatments. But now this food company and these flour mills were my sandbox. It got huge. So now I had the time to, well, here's what I remember, from other mills that I've been in. But, oh, you have a down day? Let's lock this out. Let's take a look at it. And it really changed my perspective on where pests impacted within facilities. Otherwise, it wasn't guessing. It was good. You were still putting risk to it. You were still putting logic also. But once I started to better understand process flows and all the inner workings of the manufacturing process. And like I said, I just had more time in facilities when they were down and making repairs and other projects going on, that it really kind of opened my eyes to, okay, here's where we can really make some impacts on the pest pressures that these facilities have. So it was a really neat and kind of interesting change. I had to retrain myself in a way, or think about things a little bit different. Take what I had learned, but reapply it to more of how that ingredient that I was after was being manufactured.
Yeah, what a valuable insight that has to be able to look at it from the processing side as well as the pest control side.
Yeah, it's a unique to have that balance. I mean, it was 11, 12 years in the pest control side, and I'm 11 years in the food side, to have kind of that equal balance. And then with the global role that I'm in now, it's not just flour milling. I'm helping out our oilseeds facilities, corn, animal nutrition. Some of our, we've got some plants where we're making, processing soy into the vegetable proteins for the alternative meats and stuff. So it's been a pretty interesting over the last 4 years in that role of getting to know and see and the same challenges, but different methods and processes there to kind of help them, with some of the pressures that they're seeing.
Yeah, and you mentioning all of these different types of processing that the organization you work for do, I would imagine that all of them probably have some very similar critical control points for sanitation, and then some of them probably have some wildly different sanitation measures that
Yeah,
have to be
that's
taken. So I kind of want to segue into just asking you. I mean, and I think this is kind of a no brainer. Most people know the answer to this question, but I was thinking you may have a little bit more insight into this, given your circumstance. But why is sanitation so important in that food processing facility?
so you hit on it, right? There is the easy answer, right? It's a CFR requirement. The GMPs are a regulation within the food industry, and that's why we have to clean. But I look at things, right? I'm after the pests. That's kind of my focus. But also looking at, our different products that we're manufacturing, these different ingredients. And so to me, it's the pest is just kind of the evidence, right? And so we've got a couple different things that I like to, I guess, put forward. We got our vulnerable pests, right? We're vulnerable to all different pests just because of some of the settings of where our facilities are in. Others, we have, inherent risks. So if we're milling wheat, right? We know that there's certain insects that are actually trying to attack that grain and continue that insect life cycle. That's their food source. They're after that. And then there's just some pests that based on sanitation conditions are there. And so that's, kind of what I really try to push on. Well, that risk-based program, what should be here, what shouldn't be here, what are we doing about that? But at the end of the day, whether we're an ingredient processor or it's somebody more on the front end, we don't want pests to get out into the retail sector, right? I love cookies.
Yeah.
I don't want insects in my cookies when I go to the store shelf. And so I kind of look at it from a little bit more of that personal side of it that, I have a family to feed. I look at the world and we have, food waste and spoilage is $1 billion loss annually. So that's kind of where I'm focused more so. Yes, there's the audit regulations and all that stuff, and it is important, but I'm kind of trying to, I guess I take the more of the personal approach to it from my side of it. And so when you look at that, my responsibility is to protect ADM's brand. And we've seen enough noise over the last couple of years with some major recalls due to pests. That's brand tarnishing there. And so when we look at those, we see where some of the gaps and the faults were that led, poor sanitation, poor sanitary conditions, et cetera. These pests and these insects and these rodents and whatever it is, they thrive on those types of conditions when they're poor. And so sanitation is important in food facilities, and not just food facilities, warehousing, right? So kind of throughout that entire supply chain, because it could have many different effects from regulatory impacts, customer impacts, internal audit impacts, et cetera. So maybe a long way to answer that question, but there's a multi-tier level of why sanitation is so important. But we as food producers, we want to make sure that we're producing a pest-free quality product to our customer base, and sanitation is critical in that.
Yeah, and you keyed in on so many very, very good points on that. I mean, of course, from a regulatory perspective, it's necessary, but those regulatory requirements or regulatory restrictions are there for a purpose. They're there to make sure that you're putting out the safest product that you can for the consumer. And so I know the regulatory process is in it, but when you keyed in on, hey, I'm a family man, I have children, I have a wife, and,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to make sure that the food that lands on my plate at home every evening is safe to eat, and that's really what
Yeah.
it keys in on. And then you also mentioned the brand protection too, and that is also so critical. I mean, we live in this environment now where with social media, the advent of social media, I mean, the
Yeah.
tiniest little thing can happen and it can just go viral and blow
Yep.
up. And I mean, brands can be ruined so fast and so
Yeah.
easily these days. It's become so much more critical to stay on top of your game, especially today compared to, 20, 30 years ago before social media or the internet existed.
That's right. Yep.
So when you go and you're looking at these facilities from an IPM perspective or from a sanitation perspective, what are some of the things that you look for when you go into these facilities? What are some of those key areas or key points or key things that you're looking for that you want to see? And then what are some of those things that you don't want to see inside these facilities?
So I'm kind of now it's interesting, I guess, with my role today. I'm in this by myself right now, right? I'm a team of one, if you will, to support ADM within this kind of category, if you will, really focusing on the pest control side of it. And so I have to be tactical when I go to a facility. And I just don't have time. In a week, I might visit 3 plants. And so it's limited time. And some of these facilities are just huge. And so I have to be tactical. I am so focused on basically the data from our pest control programs. And that's my lead, right? I need to know where the activity is, whether it's a pheromone program or it's the rodent traps, the bait stations outside, or if we're doing more trapping on the outside. Like that data is what's important to me, because I need to say, okay, I've got 5 hours today to spend at this facility. Here's the 6 locations I need to go to and see what's maybe going on. So back to that, the pest is the evidence, right? I want to go find out and answer some why questions. See, why are you here in these numbers? What is contributing to that? What condition, what piece of equipment, what's going on in this area that I need to try and identify and put some answers to. And so that's how I kind of have to be right now. It's very tactical, but done a pretty good process. So I've got my heat maps with my data on them, and it's okay. Let's go here. And what I find kind of to be the interesting thing is I've really reflected on the process is you go into these facilities and they're huge, right? 10 floors up, might be 6 buildings, whatever, just giant properties and acreage and buildings. And it kind of creates this calm for me because I know where I need to be. Yeah. So now on the way to there, I'm more open, I think, to stuff I see out of the corner of my eye. Well, what's this? I know where we're going, so I don't have that pressure of I've got to scour this facility and find the pocket because I've got 5 hours, right? I know where I need to go. I know there's something there. I know I'm going to find something. And I have felt over the years of really looking at this, trying to pinpoint it, that I think I've got that calm. That I know where I need to be. So, oh shoot, I just saw something out of the corner of my eye. Let's go look at this. Explain this to me. Talk to me about this. And then it's just questioning and asking, and it just kind of naturally happens that I identify some of these pockets where there's some things going on. So that's kind of been my process. And the questioning is huge. Asking the plants, what is the process? Explain this piece of equipment. Tell me what it ties into, what it doesn't tie into. Is it run all 3 shifts or is it just 2 shifts? Like all those different data points matter. And so for that part of it, there's not necessarily, each plant is unique in its own right. Now, to the other, what I don't like to see and or some common things, idle equipment, number one. That's one of my number one things. I go into some plants and we're talking through dead ends, idle equipment, where that product of whatever that plant is producing, where is it sitting stagnant, hung up, inaccessible, did we shut equipment down? And so, yeah, those are areas that I'm like, all right. And they're like, well, we don't use that anymore. Don't worry. I'm like, let's go right there right now first.
Yeah.
And then it's, but we don't use it. Exactly. That's why I want to go see it. And then we look at it, it's locked out, it's not connected, wiring might even be taken off. So we're able to then look at it, open it up. And a lot of times it's, oh, aha, I didn't know that was that. And, because some of these commodities are funny, right? Like flour or other dry ingredients like that. We think we cleaned it, but that flour has a funny way of always continuing to show up. The littlest amount on ledges and sides. And we think we cleaned it. We think we're done. And it just, you go back in 30 days and you've got another 1/2-inch layer at the bottom of that piece of equipment. And you're starting to see, some flower beetle develop in there. So yeah, idle equipment is a key thing that I'm looking for. So kind of getting to the dead zone. Maybe that's a better way to capture it. The dead zones. Because talking about internal components, right? The dead ends, but there's plenty of dead zones in the environment. So in the structure. So underneath motor mounts is one of my kind of key, and it's easier to, I guess, describe it by motor mounts because most people understand, kind of what the motor mount is for a piece of equipment. But anything that has an underneath where there's flour or corn or any commodity could get hung up from spillage, and it's not easily visible when you walk by at a decent pace going through the plant. Those are the things that I'm looking for. So I might look at trails on the floor and I might not be as interested, but there's also tells with experience after you do this, long enough. Oh wait, there's something here. And I remember when I was in milling, they let me hire 2 guys. So I was able to kind of spread some of the effort, support the plants instead of it was just me running around. And I had hired somebody that was from the pest control industry as well, and took him to a plant. And kind of earlier when I was talking about that, my education kind of changed when I got into the food processing. We're walking through and every little trail, he's like, oh man, he's getting down, looking, inspecting. And I keep on walking by. He's like, that's not important to you? I said, that's not significant enough for me. And that's not saying that, I saw insects, right? And I'm ignoring them, but I knew it wasn't something that would make an impact, right? That was a rogue flower beetle crawling around. There wasn't enough evidence to say there's a pocket here. But once I got to something and he saw me stop, drop down and, lay on my back and start digging underneath this piece of equipment, he's like, oh, now I see. Now I'm starting to get it. And that's tough when back in the pest control side, I was chasing down every trail, because I didn't know. It was hey, I see a trail. Something's got to be here. But going through these mills and these other processing, now there's other cues and tells that say, this is where I need to be. And if we continue to think about the insect, I'm after the immobile life stages, right? So we know our stored product insects have 4 life stages. The adults and larvae are relatively easy to see, and that's what we do see. That's great. Those are easy to kill when it comes to residuals and, fumigants and foggings, et cetera. But it's the egg and the pupa that are hidden that continue the life cycle after the fact. And so that's what I'm kind of clued into. And I talk about that a lot internally. The immobile life stages is what our target is. It's easy to say egg, but I like to use the word immobile to get them thinking about, okay, I've got to think. So it's not in the aisleway that we walk down every day. It's not in the aisleway that we push a broom every time or run a central vac broom or attachment. It's immobile. So immobile means it's got to be somewhere that's protected. And same with flies, right? So the larvae need to go to a more dry environment to complete that life cycle. So if the floor is wet all the time, we should be inspecting off the ground a little bit to try and identify where those pupa casings are to then have an impact on that insect. So I'm trying to take that biology of the insect as it applies into that processing environment and kind of, like I said, sort of detective work and solve where that might be, what's causing that. And then, okay, now here's a solution we can bring to the table.
Yeah, and again, you brought up so many really, really solid points when it comes to inspecting these types of facilities. And one of them, that I agree with wholeheartedly. I agree with everything that you said, but one of them I wholeheartedly agree with is a lot of these insects. They will kind of go out and forage into places. And you may see an insect or two in some places where there's high activity, but typically it's just kind of a foraging activity. But it's the hard to see places that you have to go to. And coincidentally, the hard to see places are also the hard to clean places. That's another reason why you end up with insect activity there, because that's where you're going to find the 1.5 inches of flower dust, is in the hard to reach places because they're not typically cleaned very well.
Yeah. Well, and I sometimes in some cases the cards are stacked against us.
Yeah.
We're talking mills from the 1800s still in operation.
Yeah.
I even look at the animal kind of sector right now, and the changes over the last few years, handful of years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it's really been. But those facilities weren't even designed with good sanitation in mind and sanitary design of the structure itself, I-beams and how they're placed against sides of buildings in the process, and et cetera. But yet now those standards have changed when it comes to manufacturing pet food and things of that nature. So in some cases, the deck's stacked against us on how to manage and maintain a sanitary condition to prevent or reduce how much these insects can develop, which makes it challenging. You're spot on that they're hard to reach areas to clean, but I'll counter that with, it doesn't mean we throw our hands up. Right?
Oh yeah.
We need a new building. But I get that all the time. Well, we can't do anything, Aaron. It's like, we could do something. We can always do something. And that's kind of where, there's the different, like, okay, is zero the goal, right? Like I don't prescribe to that zero is a realistic number. Again, when we're talking about wheat and corn and these commodities that are grown outside in fields, like there's feral populations, then they come inside, you have, now they're resident populations, but the inherent risk is always there. So it's really how we manage it to where it doesn't get out of our control and get to one of those impacts we talked about earlier, customer impact, audit impact, regulatory impact. So we know that we need to live with some of these or have some sort of tolerance to them. And so it's another one I try to sort of like, look, I live in the real world. We're going to have flower beetle presence to some degree in our mills, or how in what abundance is up to what our actions are. But the design, it kind of sets the pace sometimes. And if you have a really challenging, a really old facility, it can really make that keeping a good, clean environment challenging.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've been in some mill facilities that are 100, 150 years old, and you walk. They're all wood structures.
Yeah, that's right.
You're walking on one floor and you can hear somebody walking above you on the next floor, and you're watching the flowers sift through the wood beams,
Yeah, that's right.
fall on your head. You're
Yeah.
like, wow, man, this is definitely not, up to 21st century standards. But again, I mean, they're still functioning. They still work. They still operate. And we just have to do the best that we can to try to keep them as pest free as we can, given the circumstances.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. So I did want to ask you, because you talked about going around and inspecting these structures too. Do you use any kind of an inspection checklist? I know you mentioned a heat map, which I think is a terrific idea to base your inspections off of a heat map. But I'm imagining that while you walk around, you're probably filling out some kind of an inspection checklist or some kind of an inspection sheet just to make sure that you have like a paper trail.
I do not.
Oh, okay.
I do not. I am actually not a fan of checklists. I feel them to be too restrictive, but I know for some that they need that hook, right? And so I kind of back to that heat map, like that is I already have my hook. And so I carry with me my maps. And if I don't have my maps, I kind of, I joke that I'm twitching, right? I don't feel comfortable.
Right.
And that's my hook to being in the plant. I feel like I've been in plants, and it's like, I'm there for a reason, but I hadn't had a chance to do my homework before. So it was either a last minute trip, or I just got back and I'm, just took, that set of clothes out of the suitcase and refreshed them with the new set, and I'm out the door the next day. So I might have to do that when I get to the hotel, but hey, it's half day, so I'm going to go to the plant. And I'm like, hey, we've got to go back to the conference room. I can't make heads or tails of this right now, and I don't like to walk around aimlessly. That is what I have found to be my secret sauce, if you will, is to have that data plotted on a map so that I know where the pests are that I need to go focus on. So when I'm going out into the plant, I've got my heat maps with me, so I know where the data's at. I've got my flashlight, I've got my flower slick, and I have my camera. As long as I'm allowed to take it, we got some intrinsically safe areas where I can't, but in most cases I'm able to take it. That's kind of my documentation tool. And the map, I'm taking notes on that too. So between the camera and the map and the data, that would be my checklist if we're going to kind of wrap it up into that. But as far as, hey, go look on the fourth floor behind this piece of equipment, that's kind of hasn't worked for me. So it's kind of more follow the evidence. and wherever that evidence takes me, that's where I follow it. So I think that's allowed me to kind of bounce around that way.
Well, and you bring up a really interesting point because I think, we are conditioned, at least in our industry, the pest control industry, we're conditioned to work off of checklists a
Yeah.
lot. And I guess I've thought about it in the same capacity that you have, but I just haven't put words to it the way that you did. And so it's really interesting to hear you explain that because I do agree with you. I think sometimes checklists can kind of give you tunnel vision a little bit because now you're
Yeah.
just checking a box on a list and you're just following those instructions. And so you may walk past an area that you otherwise would have looked at if
Yeah.
you didn't have those instructions on a sheet of paper. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about that in that capacity. And I think that's very important. But I also like the fact that, you're not going in blind either. That heat
Yeah.
map, I think, is a critical piece of equipment. And of course, all the other tools are as well. But that heat map
Yeah.
is really going to help you out. So yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it.
It's number one to me. When we look at, inspecting from the pest side of it, I think that's, I've seen posts on LinkedIn and others like, what's the greatest inspection tool? That map is, to me, hands down it. Flashlights, I mean, all right, we can all argue about how many lumens and how big
Yeah.
and, et cetera. And James Miller and I, when we were, first starting out, that's an 8D flashlight, right? The mag lights, like we kind of joke about that today, but the brightness of the flashlight has never, like I use an intrinsically safe basic flashlight. I don't get hung up on how many lumens it is, et cetera. But between that heat map where the data's at, that to me is the most important tool for inspecting for pests.
Right. And just for clarification for anybody who may not know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but the heat map is based off of insect captures and pheromone monitors. Am I correct in assuming that?
That's right. Or it could be light traps, could be, I mean, if I'm not a site and we're seeing some rodent pressure, it'd be for rodents. So It's really just overlaying the data. And I mean, there's different terminology. What I want, because I don't like always like the color variations and all that. I want numbers. I want to know that trap, 2 had 50 flower beetle in the last time frame or whatever I'm looking at, last 30 days or 90 days, or, an exterior trap for rodents that caught whatever, 20 in the last 90 days. I want the number. So I don't like the gradient levels of just the color. The number is what I'm after, the significance. And I look for the trends and the patterns. And that's why I kind of make okay, there's something going on here. So if we're talking rodents, trap 2, for example, might have 4 catches in it. Trap 1 has 1 catch, and trap 6 has, which is say close by, has 3. I might hone in on the singular one that had the highest hit, but look at the others and say there's some migration from that, right? That's my center point is trap 2 I want to go to, but don't ignore the others that had the catches. But I'm looking at the one as being an incidental catch from that center point, and that's what I want to get. So I'm after the significant data, looking that is feeding other devices there. But it depends on the pest that I'm after on that heat map and what data I have overlaid. I'll sometimes jot down on the map. So I'll fill it with different data points. So if we have a bunch of, say, corrective actions from our pest control company, I'll make notes on that to say, hey, we've got 2 open items here, because I want to see that. Do I think it's playing a factor in as well? Do I need to push on the plant if I think that's, impacting that pest pressure? So I'll use as much data as I have available to say, hey, here's why I want to go to this area.
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely excellent plan that you've executed there. And obviously you're having success with it. So the proof's in the pudding, and you're proving it every day, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm trying internally, right? I'm encouraging, so when I've given some talks to some of our different quality groups and the different business units from a monthly GMP inspection that they might do, I really push that's what they should use, because that's, I think, sometimes where those checklists come into play. Hey, I got to go look for tools laying on the ground or doors open, kind of some of those basic GMP inspections. And I'm trying to encourage, some of them, well, hey, you've got this pest control data. If you've got some pressure, that's evidence there is some sort of GMP deficiency or condition that might be there, that so use that map to your guide as well, instead of just say, hey, I got to go to the cleaning house and hope I run into something to put down as, some action items. The data's there. So use your MSS schedules. Go look at the areas that had a weaker performance for that week or that month, where some other areas in past GMP inspections that you had some more findings or whatever. So like all the data is there for outside of the pest control to use it for other processes within the facility, like those GMP inspections and sanitation improvements, et cetera. So it's just cataloging it, right? And then putting it in a usable format and then going and applying it out on the floor.
Yeah, all excellent points. Eric, I only have one question left for you. I ask a version of this question to everybody that joins me on the podcast, kind of pertaining to the topic that we discussed. But what advice would you give like a new pest control operator or new fumigator? What kind of advice would you give them about helping a facility to maintain sanitation?
So it's a loaded question, Ben.
Yeah.
The thing that I fell in love with in pest control was the problem solving. The fumigation work, like the generals I'm talking about, were, they were fun in the beginning. They were exciting. It was a new adventure for me getting into this. And it was a lot of work on a weekend and learned a lot from it. But the way that I guess my mind operates, like I like that mental challenge. And I really quickly gravitated towards the problem solving side of it. And when I saw the customer's appreciation that, whether I solved something they've been struggling with for years, or they were in a jam and, we came up with a solution that improved that. That was kind of what drove me. And that's what drives me today. When I go out to a plant and they walk away like, holy cow, like, thank you. And, I've been at this plant 20 years and didn't know that room existed, and the help and all this, like that's really what keeps me going. And when I kind of segued some of our programs, both when I was with IFC and then even within ADM, more of the spot fumigation approach, it kind of, I got that challenge back, right? Like, because now spot fumigating, you needed to better understand flow of systems. You can't just fumigate a conveyor and say, hey, we killed the bugs. You need to know what feeds that conveyor, what that conveyor dumps into to understand that. So from a new person, one, curious, right? You've got to be curious to what you're doing and why. I start a lot of my presentations with why. Why do we do things? Intent is big with me. And so as somebody, getting into the pest control industry to make a really good career out of it, then, be curious, be inquisitive, ask lots of questions, dig into things, understand your customers and what makes them tick and what's important to them. And that'll kind of help drive that. But as far as when you get into the service side of it and to help with the sanitation side of it, inspection, we've got to get back to inspections. I see this as a weakness today. General statement here, everybody, general statement.
Yeah.
It is a weakness. Like, we're good at checking traps, we're good at collecting data, but we're not being so good at using that data and saying something else is going on. Let's go identify what's there, and then bringing that forward to the customer to say, hey, I found a handful of flour underneath this motor mount, and there's all life stages of insects in there. We need you to clean it up, and boom. Think about how many eggs we remove at that point, right? So it's searching for those. And then when we get into the spot fumigations, the bin fumigations, the foggings, even if it is a structural fumigation, it's after that, right? Like, I'm big on that post-treatment inspection. That is your evidence of what was missed on cleaning, what was missed in opening equipment. But a lot of reports I see afterwards is just hey, we killed everything. There's all these pictures of dead bugs and high five everybody. And we, as the food industry or that customer that's receiving this, we need to know what we missed, how we can improve. So looking for those continuous improvements. You fog a facility and you see, live insect activity, don't look at that as a failure and be afraid to communicate that to the customer. Inspect, why is that pocket of insect still live right there? Look up, and you might sit there and say, hey, there's that 2 inches of product, Ben, you were talking about on this overhead that never got cleaned. Now, immediately after that, you have something to go to your customer to say, you should get somebody to clean that up immediately before you start up. When we start taking that kind of more inspection-based approach, reading evidence after these fumigation activities and just during general pest control with the pheromones, you see something in there and you change, there's a change, there's more activity one week from the other. When you stop, pause, and start looking for those conditions of what that answer, why you're seeing that, your customers are going to be very happy, but that's when you start solving problems, right? IPM, integrated pest management. But if we're just going to collect data, put it on, and then wait for those large scale treatments, these insects are going to win out, or these pests in general are going to win out. So be curious. Like I said, I ask questions, dig in, but inspection, we've got to get back to inspection and use the triggers and the devices to lead to that next step. Follow the evidence.
Yeah, everything you said is 100% on point, of course. I like to say that, one of the more important tools in the IPM toolbox is the detective hat. You have to put that on. You have to be curious. You have to be open-minded. You have to be willing to learn. Another thing that I like to say, and I didn't create this. I stole it from somebody else. I don't remember who, but the day that you think you know it all in our industry is the day you need to retire. Because, you never know it all. You always have to be open and willing to learn.
100%. And someone I listen to, Dr. Bobby Corrigan. Every time I am in a place I get to hear him talk, I get like re-energized. What he kind of brings to the table. And there was a handful of years ago, maybe 5-6 years ago, he talked about using more game cameras, right? And we're pushing a lot of game cameras for rodent issues. And but what he said that stood out to me was it kind of like my analogy with moving from the pest control to the food industry side, and you had to relearn that perspective on how pests play within a plant like that. But he's like started using game cameras, and he's like, it changed my whole perspective on rodents. So somebody at that level to take new information and not necessarily reinvent, but use that new information to continue to push his craft forward, his knowledge forward, his, science forward is pretty remarkable. So it's spot on. Those ones that kind of get into that rut and say the same things over and over again that they have for the last 20 years. I'm with you. It might be time to sail off into the sunset.
Yeah, one of the worst things that I like to hear when I go out and talk to people in our industry, because a lot of times I ask them, why are you doing it this way? Not to challenge them, but to just find out. And one of the terms that I hate hearing the most is, I do it that way because we've always done it.
Oh, yeah.
I hate that term.
Same.
I'm like, well,
Same.
that may be true and that may even be successful, but I think you need to understand why it's done that way and not just say, because we've always done it that way.
You hit on something, and I've got to add this to it because it goes in line with that. So the other thing for new people coming in, not just new, old, people that are still in this, read the labels.
Oh yeah.
Read the labels. I know we say that. I know it's on all the stuff, but just what you said, we've always done it this way. There's too much information being handed down on how to do things, and how diluted is that messaging. So read the applicator's manual, read them over and over and over again, each time. But I see, because I deal with a lot of different pest control companies across a global network, there's a lot of just handed down information, and it's clear some of that why and the intent and how to properly use some of these products and where and when, it's not getting down there. So I remember early on, I didn't have a great manager when I got into pest control. So I learned very quickly, if I'm going to make a go at this, I've got to figure this out myself. And I used to sit in the truck for hours at accounts reading we had the PCT handheld guide in our book and the MPMA field guide. We had a little microscope, a handheld microscope from back then, and labels. We had books of labels, right? And so it was just reading that and just making sure I'm doing this right and read it again. I've got some things I spray around my house, and even Roundup. Every time I go to put some herbicide down around the house, there's something else. Just pull the label out, reread the label, make sure I'm doing. But I see too many shortcuts in that areas, and I don't know that some of these technicians and others even know how to do some of the simple calculations or ask the question, well, how did you come up with that dosage? Well, I don't know. My manager told me to use that. That's a problem, right? So read those labels on what you're putting out there.
You're absolutely right. Yes. And you don't have to memorize the labels, But the more you read
No.
them, the more you understand how to read them, and it makes it easier as you go along. Because I know, the first time I ever cracked open, a pesticide label when I first started 22 years ago. I mean, I won't say it was Greek, but it wasn't the easiest thing to
Oh,
read. So
yeah,
you have to practice on how to read them so you can kind of understand the terminology, the nomenclature, how they're
that's
designed,
right.
how they're structured. And so the more you read them, the better you get at being able
Yep.
to and the more information you'll find. I still find to this day, I'm 22 years into the industry now, and every time I pick up a label and read it, even if I've read it 100 times before, I will find
You
something
pick
that I didn't.
something. Yeah,
Yeah, so you always.
absolutely. And it gives you the different. There's two things I'll mention with labels and just products. But there was one years ago. Again, reading the label, I got so excited because we were dealing with some roaches at an account, and I read this IGR, and it had in the label, "Hey, you can use paint rollers or paintbrushes to apply this material." I'm like, "What? Like, I
Yeah,
don't need to mix this." I call up James Miller. I'm like, "Hey, I'm going to the store. I'm picking up rollers and paintbrushes." He's like, "Well, why?" I'm like, "Because it says we could do it." And he's like, okay. And it just, you pick up on those things. And the other, to give you guys a little plug, mag toxin, the spot fumigant, phenomenal label when it comes to fumigating equipment and getting into those spot fumigations. But I have found that, yes, your recommended rate is 1 per 1320 cubic feet. But if you read, it's designed for loosely designed equipment that is not readily and easily able to be sealed. So expect leakage. You can max that out. You can go at a higher rate. And it allows some of that flexibility there. And so it kind of, when I looked at the applicator side of things, in fumigating, right? There's many out there that know how to apply fumigant, or there's a checklist or a cheat sheet that says, hey, you put 1 plate per 1,000, or whatever that is, whatever that standard became for a trailer fumigation, or whatever your pre-pack standard became for rail car fumigations. But that mag toxin, I felt, or the structural, okay, seal the building up tight as you can, pump it full of gas, and take your readings and add gas. Right? It was, like I said, it didn't have that mental challenge, but the spot fumigation approach, you had to understand systems and know flows and what tied into it. But then came the, hey, I know I've got activity in a roll stand. I know I'm not going to hold gas in that roll stand, but hey, customer, we can disrupt the life cycle because mag toxin will allow for a higher rate. It's only targeting adults and larvae. Your cleaning is dependent on this. And I've had milling customers say, I'm okay not killing everything, but not doing something isn't okay. And so again, it became one of those solution things, but it took reading that label to really understand the limitations of what it offered and what I could do, and knowing the math and how to calculate that max dosage and know that I'm not going to, render that product to where you got your spontaneous combustion rate. But we've done other spot fumigations, and it's like, well, what was your dosage rate? And I wrote, well, we went with the recommended 1 per 1320. Well, I'm like, well, of course we didn't kill anything. Like, you lost that gas in 2 hours. But I have found that there's not that total understanding of those labels. So yes, read them in sections. For what you're doing, you don't have to read a 25-page manual cover to cover each time you do it. But yes, refresh yourself on the section that applies, and again, bounce around. If that takes you to another section, then great. Takes you to another section. Storage and disposal. That one probably gets overlooked a lot, but
yeah.
Storage of fumigant. You think about flasks, and possibly having that flashing. Like, there's language that describes that and what you should do about it. So read the label, keep pulling them out, looking at them, because as an applicator, you're on the hook. And when we're coming up at plant, I will. This is where something, I don't know if I get a brief, internally or not, but if there's some things that a plant say wants done, and it's not violating the label, but it's getting to that point of where, hey, we don't have comfort. I align with the applicator all day long because I know what that can look like from, the Department of Ags being, called in, the scrutiny when it comes to that. So, but you've got to know your labels, and you got to know that that's your applicator license on the line. And if you're making an application based on somebody telling you, yeah, this is what we used to do, I'd caution new people on take that, but then go educate yourself.
Yeah, and you brought up another excellent point there too about the applicator's license. The applicator's license has your name on it. not
Yep.
necessarily the company's name. So if something goes wrong, and we've seen these things, we've seen situations pulled into litigation in courts of law,
Mhm.
many, many times. And yeah, the company can be in trouble, especially if they instructed you to perform something in a certain way. They can also be on the hook. But ultimately, if you are the certified applicator and you're the one that broke the law by not following the label, you are going to be on the hook for that. It's your name on
Yep.
that license, not the company's. So, there may be some equal responsibility there, but you are also going to be in trouble. So, and that's important to know too. If you work for an organization that asks you to do something that's against the law or against the label, you better
Yep.
question it
Yep.
because
Yeah.
you're on
Question
the
and
hook.
ask questions. Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. Well, hey, Eric, I don't want to take up any more of your time today. Listen, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. I think everything that we talked about today, all of this insight was super valuable for everybody who's going to hear it. So thank you very much for taking some time to educate us.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. Again, appreciate the request, reaching out to me about it. Enjoyed it. We just scratched the surface.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So
I'll have
much.
to have you come back on. We can dig in a little bit deeper on some of these key points sometime in the future.
Absolutely.
I want to thank Eric for helping us determine just why sanitation is so important. After all, if you keep your facility clean, the chances of pest infestations are drastically diminished, not to mention the reduction of potentially harmful pathogens. On the next episode of Dagish America Presents, we'll be talking about a tool that we use to inhibit certain insects' ability to even breed in the first place: mating disruption. And remember, if you have a question you'd like for us to answer, please feel free to email us at podcast@dagishamerica.com. You can also find us on our website at dagishamerica.com or on all of the main social media outlets. Until next time, I'm Ben Harrell, and I hope you have a safe and terrific day.